So actually what I wanted to say really follows up really nicely with what Adam said. So I think in general, throughout the week, we've had a great discussion about these different meanings and models of resilience and the challenges of operationalizing it. And as I said yesterday, I totally agree that Susie's matrix does a really great job of sort of synthesizing those different conceptualizations. And I also really, really liked that it brought the political dimensions of resilience, so basically how resilience is used more front and center, which I think is something that a few people like Jose and John have mentioned in their talks here, but we haven't really spent a lot of time discussing that in depth. So I totally agree that that's something that maybe we could do a little bit more of going forwards. And I think it's really critical for us to do that because there is a growing body of social science research, particularly in literature, that has been critiquing the resilience discourse and policy for a number of reasons. And since I've kind of spent quite a bit of time looking at that recently, I thought I'd maybe sum up, for those of you who have not delved into that literature, some of the sort of key criticisms. So first of all, I think something that, Roger, that you mentioned yesterday, there's this concern about whether it's really appropriate to apply ecological models to social systems, and particularly a concern that when you do this, and when you apply this sort of systems thinking approach, that you sort of obscure the inequalities and issues within those systems. So that's one thing. Another criticism, which would apply, I think, more to the bounce back sort of row in that table, is the idea that resilience is inherently conservative, and that resilience initiatives have generally been too focused on really maintaining the status quo with all of its injustices and problems in society, and that by promoting resilience, we're actually basically maintaining the status quo and preventing the needed transformations in society. There's also a criticism that resilience, by saying that, accepting the fact that we're constantly changing and there are constantly these crises, you're actually naturalizing crisis. And instead of actually looking, and it's not pushing us basically to critically examine the underlying systemic causes of these crises. And in literature, that's kind of often coming from the more Marxist critical perspectives, who would say, for instance, that we're not really questioning whether capitalism is causing some of these crises and not questioning the sort of political economy. And some have actually gone so far as to say that resilience discourse has been so successful because it tends to resonate with neoliberal ideology. And so obviously these are more extreme positions, but there are a larger number of researchers in general who have voiced concern that resilience does tend to downplay the role of differential power relations, which I know was something that Kirsten mentioned or questioned yesterday, and just generally hasn't fully considered the politics of resilience, or how the resilience discourse is actually being applied. And so another thing I think is also you just need to basically deal with these sort of fundamental trade-offs in resilience building, which I know is something also that David, that you mentioned yesterday. And I guess because there are these trade-offs, we need to think of resilience as a contested process, and I think really engage with that. And one way that I've been doing it, actually, is it possible to show just something really quick? Can I plug in?
I don't know if we can quickly switch that. So I think
Okay.
what we should do is maybe you can show it after we go through and everybody says, and while they're talking,
sure, perfect.
We will arrange.
So I guess it's just sort of one way that I've been trying to think about how you could sort of use these different understandings of resilience as a boundary object. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And then try to bring stakeholders together, so they don't necessarily have to agree on a definition, but bring them together, and then sort of they together would work out some of these fundamental questions about, well, what I've said, the resilience for who, what, when, where, and why. And I can show that in a minute. But
great, perfect.